Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We've got a couple of folks here online, and I will introduce our guest in just a moment, but thank you so much for being here. My name is Kelly Rodriguez, and I'm the director of our Master of Legal Studies and our sports law program here at Seattle University School of Law. Super excited to chat with you all. So we have one of our alums with us today, Christian Kennedy, and I'm going to just let you introduce yourself, Christian, if you would, and tell us
Okay.
about kind of what you're doing. Don't get too far into the weeds, though, because we've got some really good content coming
Okay.
up. So
Okay. I'll keep it high level. So my name is Christian Kennedy, like Kelly said, and I am currently the Director of Information Security, Governance, Risk, and Compliance at Wolfspeed. We are a semiconductor company based out of what's called the Research Triangle in the Raleigh-Durham area. And gosh, it's going to be 2 years in July that I've been with them. So the
that's
time
crazy.
went so fast.
That's insane.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was looking back at kind of like putting this together, I can't believe it's been 2 years since we've kind of really gotten to know each other pretty well. Um, Could you tell me a little bit about what Wolfspeed does as an organization? And I ask specifically because I think when we think about compliance, I don't think people are like, what? Semiconductors, right? So like I'm
Right.
curious if you could explain what Wolfspeed does.
Sure, sure. Yeah, semiconductor can kind of be one of those elusive terms out there. So what Wolfspeed does is, I think the way I like to explain it to most people is we know there's silicon carbide, and that's what most, or a silicone, right? Most computer chips are made out of some form of silicone. What Wolfspeed does is they develop out of silicon carbide, which lasts 100 times longer or more than most standards silicone products do. So you're looking at technology, aerospace, vehicles. I mean, anything that tech touches, which seems to be everything these days, including
Mhm.
our household appliances, um, we could potentially be a part of that product.
Wow, that's awesome. So we're going to kind of take you all on a journey today, right? Like we are here to talk about pathways to compliance. And because I get this question a lot from our prospective students, and then even our students in the program who are kind of like looking at either entering the compliance space or folks who are trying to pivot their career either later into the compliance space or within the compliance space. And we specifically asked Christian to join us today because Christian, you've just got a really great story about how you have meandered through different industries,
Hmm.
but all in and around compliance. So first, I'm hoping that you can talk to us a little bit about what does a day in the life of someone in the governance, risk, and compliance space look like?
It's never the same. So we do not tend to get bored here for sure. Um, a lot of, I think when it really everything boils down to is for governance, risk, and compliance, where we are the eyes and ears and voice that go in and do look at everything from the risk perspective. So, based on what that risk is, you have many contributing factors. It could be compliance, it could be internal policies and procedures, it could be what we're awaiting different regulations to be published by, not just in the US, we're a global
Hmm.
company, so this could be, we're waiting for artificial intelligence regulations to come out of the EU
Right.
here in the next 12 to 24 months. So we have an eye on the compliance space. We're very tied into corporate compliance and law there. Risk management, because we are part of the IT organization, we're very tied into IT, but we have connected fingers out to every area of the business. Any part of the business which uses IT, which is pretty much all of them, we usually have some sort of interaction with. And then, of course, we're all looking to leverage this to govern. So, how do we best govern the policies and processes inside the company to make sure we're adherent with all those external factors and that we are keeping an eye on doing the right thing? So, that's kind of I guess, the short version.
Sure.
Um, and there's a lot of different activities underneath each of those categories. Since getting
So
into a director role, it seems like a lot of meetings, but
yeah, so I'm
yeah,
curious, what does your role like? Do you have a team underneath you?
I do.
How big is your team?
Sure. So my team, I currently have 5 members.
Okay.
That when I joined, there There was one person there on the team that was getting ready to make an exit. So I feel very fortunate in a lot of ways because I had a good transition. And then I was brought in to build an excuse me, a department or an organization because the company had gone through quite a big, growth during
Mhm.
that period of time. So I hired all four people that I currently
Wow.
have on my team, which is a rarity.
Yeah.
um, and my team is, I will brag, they're excellent. Phil, they just came together in a way that's been amazing. So very fortunate to get the hires I did.
That's awesome. And then when you think about kind of like what your day-to-day looks like, and you mentioned a lot of meetings, is that meetings with your technology folks? Is that meetings with your board? Who do you meet with, and what sort of high-level things do you chat about?
Sure. So majority speaking, we do have a lot of we have weekly check-ins with the larger group. So GRC is part of information security, and the different areas underneath InfoSec, as we like to call it inside, we have identity management, data protection, cybersecurity itself, insider threat, which is very interesting area, and then we have a group of engineers and architects. Right, they're the ones. Cyber defense is our fence, right? If you're in a house, cyber defense is your fence.
Mm.
They're keeping the baddies out. And as you start to layer back through, you get to the insider threat piece inside the house. So we have multiple layers of these different slices inside of the InfoSec organization. GRC is a little different because those other five areas tend to be much more technical focused. So we
Mhm.
work with them from a risk and compliance perspective on looking at different technical elements. And then we act as advisors and guides to the rest of IT and also to the different business organizations. So we could be in a prep meeting to go to the audit board one quarter, and the next quarter we could be writing policies because a new reg changed. Um, most of those presentations that are given at the audit or senior leadership level are handled by VPs and senior directors, et cetera. I'm lucky because GRC is different. So I've often been invited to go in and speak, on behalf of that area.
Mhm.
So it's an opportunity that I did not get in earlier parts of my career.
That's amazing. That's
Yeah.
really exciting. I also want to mention, just for those of us, for those folks who have joined us, please feel free to drop questions in the
Yeah.
Q&A. Feel free to raise your hand. This is very much an open forum. So if you have questions for Christian and her journey, I am certain that I will touch on some of them, but no, by no means will touch on all of them. So feel free to jump in here. Um, so I know a little bit about your journey, and we'll get there, but I'm curious to know, where on earth did your compliance journey start? Like, did you wake up one day and you're like, I want to be a compliance professional?
No, I did not.
I want to
So
work. It's like that like Christmas movie. It's like, I want to be a dentist, right? You're like, no, I want to work, I want to be a compliance officer.
no, it was definitely not on my list when I was applying to university for my undergraduate. So I actually started off pre-med and chemistry, and I did not get along so well.
Yeah, me neither.
Yeah, it was a struggle. So I luckily had a great advisor. I ended up getting my undergraduate degree in communications at the Edward R. Murrow College of Communications at Washington State. And I had two minors. One was in French and one was in economics. So, but because of all those science classes, I ended up, you know, along the way, um, going into biotechnology. I was brought in essentially, first I was brought in to do technical writing. So I had this very diverse background. So I did a lot of technical writing and but had a real flair for business process. So certified there, ended up down that kind of pathway, if you will,
Mhm.
on the tech side, and then transitioned over to business. And when I transitioned to the business side, that's when I landed in risk and compliance. So they were looking for someone who was a good communicator, who understood business processes and procedures. And then that next layer came from writing requirements documents for technical systems to writing policy for the company.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny because when we chat, I mean, our first two courses in the program, right, are kind of like Intro to American Legal Studies, and then this writing course, Writing and Research. And it's often a very steep learning curve.
Mhm.
Christian, we've had this conversation before. I also have a technical writing background, right? I was
Yeah.
doing technical writing and business process design
Mhm.
before compliance was even a word,
Right.
and or certainly not a business silo. And it's funny how when you have an eye towards like distilling things into processes
Mhm.
and really picking apart business use cases, how that then just kind of like lends itself into this transition, right? And has become this whole industry
Yeah.
in and of itself. So I'd love for you to kind of walk us through that journey from, you're in the business side and then you kind of like land in this compliance space. And now you're in semiconductors.
Yeah, how'd that happen? Um, it has been interesting, and I even looking back before, I landed in biopharmaceuticals for healthcare, it was, a lot of the places I was getting hired into was because I had technical and communications. So in that for Prince's Cruises and Cunard Line, P&O, this in the cruise industry, I was hired to go in and redo their training program because they were having compliance issues. Now, I didn't recognize it as that back then. Um, so we redid the program, and then there was some security stuff happening in Sydney. They're like, "Can you, redo this piece?" So I actually started before I recognized it as being part of my life, I guess.
Hmm.
So with healthcare, I worked for a large pharmaceutical company in Thousand Oaks, California, and it was on the pharmacovigilance side. So that is a big fancy word. That means global patient safety. It took my husband 5 years to learn that word. And
I don't know
so
that I can, like,
yeah,
still to this day, I don't know that I can say it.
we've got it on video because I don't think most of the people I worked with would believe me that he knew the word. Um, but we have a lot of fun with that vocabulary now. So I went into this role and had an amazing experience my first year in. It was really on a more of a contractor consultancy role. And I guess it was about a year and a half. They're like, "Hey, would you like to join the company?" And I thought, what an amazing opportunity. So there was that piece. And then they had regulatory intelligence, which nobody wanted to take on. Um, but because I had the tech background, I was like, "Oh, give it to me. I'll
Yeah,
take it."
right.
Because I get to ride in both worlds. It's pretty awesome. So I did the global regulatory intelligence for the pharmacovigilance space for 7 years, and that was monthly reporting. What that did was all of those regs in those global entities out there that are the equivalent to an FDA or that
Hmm.
associates it would all get pulled in. We did an extraction, and we could go through and filter through, to see what's changed, what hasn't changed, what's coming up, where are all the duplicates, which was 70% of the report,
Hmm.
but we get it down into reportable information that could be fed up to management and senior leadership. So um, I was there when I decided to go back to school after being out of school for almost 30 years. It was a little terrifying, and get my master's degree. And that's how I eventually, came to the program at Seattle U because it hit every marker I was looking for that I was not finding in other master's programs. So a big part of my motivation was in pharmaceutics. They like to see you well papered if you're in a role like this. So there was motivation there. I had an amazing director I reported to who was, "I'll sign off on anything you want," because we did get a little bit of a reimbursement for tuition,
Hmm.
um, which was great. I mean, I did have great benefit there. But I would say during the second term of the program, I realized it wasn't really the career uppance that I wanted in pharmaceuticals. It was a change. So that's where the kind of pivot factor starts to come to play. And I was in a class when it was talked about. If you could pivot your mindset 5%. And I thought of myself as a biopharmaceutical professional in the compliance world, and I started to flip that dialogue. So I'm actually a risk and compliance professional, and that translates to any industry out there. So I left healthcare, went to a consulting firm, and ended up working in data governance and privacy security for Disney Streaming and Hulu for a year and a half on a consultancy gig, which was fantastic. It's when the merger was happening, so
Oh, wow, that's fun.
very interesting. Got involved because of the privacy piece in fraud investigation and worked a lot with legal internationally there. So another area of exposure that I did not have before. And I got a phone call from someone I'd worked with 20 years ago who happened to work for Wolfspeed and said they'd like me to meet a few people No job was available, but I networked. I'll say if there's one thing you can do for your career, network like crazy,
Oh
because
my
you
gosh,
never,
yes.
never know where it's going to come from. You just, it just happens.
Mhm.
Um, so I met these people, got off we had Zoom calls. We were at the end of the pandemic and going into what does the world look like now? So,
Right, right.
I got a call 2 weeks later, and the friend that I'd worked with before said, I need someone to come in and build a GRC program. What about North Carolina? And being a Northwest girl that had been in LA too long, I was like, get me out.
Yeah.
LA was good to me. No complaints there. But we ended up landing in Chapel Hill in the Raleigh Durham area, and I'm actually building a program and building a team. And for the days it is frustrating, it is as equally rewarding when you get that one check mark, right?
Mhm.
Or you're able to work with internal audit and realize you're going to be able to up the cybersecurity score because you're streamlining and you're building and you're
Mhm.
getting cohesion. So hopefully that kind of told the path.
No, I mean, that's amazing. I'd love to chat a little bit about like for folks who are looking to get into compliance, right? Because you and I
Mhm,
both came into this like field before compliance was its own field, when we
mhm,
were doing compliance before we had the language for it. If someone now is exiting their uh bachelor's degree program, or they're finding themselves in this in a place where they want to enter compliance after doing
mhm,
a different career. Um, you maybe from the hiring perspective, like what sort of
mhm.
things do you look for when you're looking to bring somebody onto your team?
Those are great questions. And I think my approach might be a little different from others. Shared some of my hiring strategy because they're like, your team seems so strong after being together for barely a year, really.
Mhm.
We're
Yeah,
going
that
into a
says a
year and a
lot.
half. So I think from a hiring perspective, what I looked for on paper, we're going through a project right now, and this is nothing that I can't share, but we all get those job requisitions that say must have, would be nice, should be
Mhm.
certified or have a degree in, and we have to have some place to start. But a year and a half later, I was like, was that real? What we put on
Mhm.
paper actually make sense? And for the most part, it did, because the resumes that I got in or the CVs I got in, I was able to go through very quickly. I knew what I was looking for. Um, I knew the two areas that we needed experts in right away, and I knew the areas that I could get a new hire or an intern to come in that we could grow a
Mhm.
career with. So I got all the qualified candidates. I started my interviews, and I can tell you 5 minutes in if I'm going to hire somebody or not. It's about the fit for me.
Mhm.
So, but what did I look for on paper before the note to HR saying, please get started
Yeah.
now? um, on paper, I looked for, I'm very big about community. I actually do look for volunteer work or something that's, along those lines, student government. I consider all of that, if you're involved with the club, something that contributes to community and, kind of the social influence, of where you
Mhm.
are, whether it's school or work or other places. So I'll look there. Looking for someone, usually I will look for communications, I look for law, I look for tech, and why. The big thing for that 5 minute interview is that if someone can communicate, I know that they can take messages and deliver them. They're probably going to be good at extracting information.
Mhm.
um, I look for law or something in that realm because I know that they probably have a good chance of being able to interpret. So even if they haven't studied per se, if they can interpret what's put in front of them, then again, I know that's another skill that's brought to the table. Um, I will say this, the best class I think I took for that was the one that I've heard people say, it's so difficult, that first term,
Oh yeah.
the the writing,
Yeah.
writing and analysis. And it was, I mean, I had a background, in tech writing. It wasn't easy. I will say the class wasn't easy. And the, piece about, American history, halfway through, I'm like, why am I taking this? It's the foundation for the entire program.
Mhm.
I mean, everything. I still refer back to those books that are on my shelf
Mhm.
still
I see them behind you.
today.
Yeah.
They're right over the
Yeah.
shoulder. But I kept all of them. I use
Mhm.
them. I use them on a regular basis. Like I sold one textbook out of the entire program. I kept everything else.
Mhm.
Um, so I look for, communications, law, and also tech, because if someone knows how to take requirements and figure out a
Mhm.
product to buy or not buy or give recommendations for, then it is almost that communications brand manager kind of thing involved there. But there are the things that are on paper. And I think one thing I would say, don't be dissuaded ever on a job listing if it calls something something else. I can say
Oh, sure.
governance, risk, and compliance. It could be called something completely different.
Mhm.
I look at the skill set, right? Do
Yeah.
keyword searches about the skills you have, and then you can always cross-reference that with risk and compliance. But I had a couple unlikely candidates that they were just eclectic enough. I interviewed them, and one of them I hired, and she wasn't even done with college yet.
That's amazing. Wow. I
So,
mean,
yeah.
I think what I hear you saying too is that the and we've talked about this, right? Like so much of what we are looking for in compliance, right? Compliance ends up being this kind of, if you think about compliance as a hub and spoke model, right? Like we end up
Mhm.
being the hub communication to marketing, to technology, to security, to customer service, to
Yeah.
sales, to all of these other components. And it means that you may not need to have a really strong background in tech, right? That might be
Mhm.
your forte, but it
Right.
might not be. But you need to at least kind of understand the product, right? You need to understand how it works a little bit. Sales might not be your background,
Mhm.
but you need to kind of understand what the sales folks need to do their job. Marketing may not be your background, but you need to understand what marketing needs to communicate out. And law, and from a compliance standpoint, is increasingly part of the skill set. But that is also just a component of all of these things. So we see folks
Mhm.
coming into certainly our program, but coming into compliance generally, usually with a background in something else. And they
Mhm.
want kind of the legal framework as applied to whatever it is their subject matter expertise is in,
Yeah.
to kind of round out that skill set.
Yeah. It's I know for me, when I started the program, I worked for a massive corporation. So we had our compliance slice, and then when we were done with it, we handed it over the fence to legal. And after, I think I've been in the program a couple of terms, and so I started looking at what they were producing, and like really the only difference, they were doing a lot of the citation work. So then we were putting it forward for contracts and other things that it was ready to roll. So I was like, well, I'll give it a shot. What are they going to say? You were wrong.
Yeah.
Um, but it ended up taking, again, everything I was learning at the time and just taking it on upon myself to apply it to what I was already doing. And in the next year, it was, hey, Christian, what project are you working on?
Hmm.
Or the one attorney I worked with the most, like, where'd you start doing this? I'm like, oh, I'm getting my master's in legal studies. You're like, what? And
Hmm.
like, you can do as much of this as you want. It makes my life a lot easier. So you got this
Yeah.
rapport going, and then it opened up other projects that were a little more interesting, if you will, a little deeper than what I had been working on before.
I think the other thing, and you mentioned this also, I have a couple questions that I want to get to also because they're really fun questions.
Mhm.
But you touched on networking, and I want to take
Yeah.
two parts of that. One, I think, I mean, absolutely in any industry for sure, networking is just so important, especially in
Mhm.
our culture today. And I don't just mean networking on LinkedIn, right? I think sometimes people really want to reduce it to that, but networking is so much more than that. But
Mhm.
so cultivate your network. It's super important. Be definitely network on LinkedIn. I don't want to say you shouldn't. And this is not a plug for LinkedIn necessarily, right? But network online, grow your network online. Don't be afraid of doing that. But network in person, get out there, go to your industry conferences, etc. You will meet people. You will meet people who want to hire you in the future if you cultivate that relationship. Um, and I mean cultivating the relationship with sincerity, with the goal of
Mhm.
not asking them for a job right away, right? Like
Yeah.
that's a part of it too, I think. But the other component that I love about our program is the opportunity to find and use examples and build camaraderie
Mhm.
with fellow students, right? So I see you all working together, and will be working in healthcare, and they're like, well, I'm struggling with this problem in my work. and somebody else will be working
Yeah.
in something else, finance or food security or something like that. And it's effectively the same problem,
Hmm.
and you're able to solve it with very similar skills that you've either honed in the program, but really you've brought them in from your respective experiences, and then you now have the same common language because you've been studying the legal
Yeah.
frameworks to really dig in and solve them together, and build on that, both the relationship building, the networking, but also really like solve some really cool problems.
Yeah. It's a great point to bring out because we really are communicators and problem solvers, and there is that common language that it creates, and some of the you know projects that we would do during the program where you get teamed up with maybe another person or four other people. And the one team I was on, we had a problem to solve. It's like, okay, we have three legal databases available to us in a library. We each grabbed one, we each did the research, we bought it back. There was probably about 40% crossover, which is always to me a great sign. And then we were able to filter through, and we were speaking the same language. Healthcare, at that time, I was in data governance, but had the biopharmaceutics background, insurance, and then and public
Oh,
servitude.
yeah.
So it was very different. Yeah, but we were definitely had a core language that we all understood and spoke. And having those different perspectives, it's a problem in semiconductor today is going to look probably 50% or more similar in healthcare. So you
Mhm.
have a conversation with the colleagues like, yeah, I'm struggling with this issue. It's like, have you thought about this? We tried this in our environment. And to me, it also lets you have a little bit more open conversation because there's not necessarily a competitive element to it as well, right? This
Yeah,
is an open forum that you can share. So yeah, I think
yeah,
that's huge.
for sure. One of the questions that we had was around what textbooks were we referencing? And so
Hmm.
one of them off the top of my head, Foundations of Regulatory Compliance. I think the textbook is actually called that.
Hmm.
Um, it's a fantastic book around kind of like nuts and bolts of administrative law. I
Yeah.
will caveat that a lot has changed in administrative law in the last 2 years. Is that the title of it?
Is it this one? Is it
Yeah, it,
the Law of Governance, Risk Management, and Compliance?
yes,
Is
actually
that
that is it.
by
Yeah,
by
yeah,
Miller? Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Um,
That's the one I use the most, next to the
yeah,
writing one in the
that's a
blue book.
really, it's a great text. It's a case book, it's meaty, it's expensive,
Hmm.
but it's a fantastic text. It is, I don't want to say it's currently out of date. It's going to need a big revision pretty soon because
Hmm.
so much has changed in administrative law, and I expect that more will be changing soon. Um, and the other books, we've had a few change over the last couple of years, and we're moving more towards kind of open educational resources to bring down a little bit of cost, and also just because so much is changing in the legal landscape.
Oh my gosh.
Um, yeah, right.
It feels like every day. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wanted to put that out there. Let's see, we did have one um question about um entering the program with years of experience in compliance. What courses did you find most useful, relevant, or insightful that you'd recommend to others? And I can probably pull up some course names if that's helpful to you. In like, there's organizational investigations is one of the ones that
Hmm.
folks take. I'm like, I have it on a different screen here, so let
I'm trying
me,
to think.
I know.
I have.
Um,
I will say the Law of Governance, Risk Management, and Compliance is key for
that
me. It
that
was a key
course or
course.
that textbook goes to the foundations of regulatory
Yes.
compliance.
Yes.
Um, and oh, the other one is contract management
Hmm.
in and policy drafting. That was a good course.
Yeah.
And then the other
I
question, go ahead,
I
sorry.
was going to say, and I was that was the second one I was going to mention was the uh, contract
Yeah.
management course. I use that. So one of the things GRC does as the lead is I work with legal to review all the new big contracts coming in for data privacy, privacy, data processing. We follow for the most part European approach.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's without that, I don't think I could look and assess a contract as quickly as I can now. It used it used to take me a lot longer.
Well,
So
yeah, I mean,
a
you
lot.
know, when you have the like language around it, right, it's
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah.
I'm gonna drop, these are our 4 kind of core compliance courses. We have the top 2 are our um, the first 2 are our intro courses to the program. The next 4 are what we call our compliance core, and those kind of like lay the foundation for the first year. All 6 of them together kind of lay the foundation of the first year. And they're really, really designed to apply to like building a compliance and risk management program regardless of industry. So they touch on healthcare, finance, data, all of the other
Yeah.
things, but they're really designed to just, what does it mean to build a compliance program? And from a proactive standpoint, risk management, to a reactive standpoint, responding to audit, those sorts of things. So I hope that's helpful. And then in the second year, folks take the whatever electives they're interested in, and they finish their capstone. It does actually bring up another question that came up, and that was how flexible the program is. If it has to be adhered to in the 2 years, where folks would be taking it effectively part-time, we can accelerate it. It is possible. It depends a lot. I want to make sure that I work with students really carefully to make sure that they're balancing life and work. It depends a lot on what you've got going on in your life. It's super doable. But I usually recommend that folks start with those first 2 classes just because it's a huge ramp up, right? That legal
Yeah.
analysis, research, and writing. Legal writing is a whole different language, and
Yeah.
I really want to make sure that students are set up well, and have a lot of support. So absolutely, we can accelerate it. I've had students do that. I've also had students extend it, right? Life happens. You need to take some time off. You want to go down to 1 class, those sorts of things. All of that's very doable. The other question I had kind of in conjunction with that is, are students limited to the online classes? No. If you're looking for the compliance and risk management degree, those 6 classes that are posted there are required in addition to the capstone. However, if you wanted to swap out your electives, for example, I have a student right now who is wanting to do compliance and risk management, but really focus on environmental law. And they're in the Seattle area, and they're taking a lot of environmental law classes on campus. So that is definitely a possibility. So we have some flexibility there. I would encourage you all, I'll make sure that my email is dropped in the chat. But please, please feel free to reach out. Happy to kind of build a program that makes sense. We also have some other MLS programs that are definitely flexible, and they can also take these compliance courses. So we have a lot of flexibility in like what we can create for students. Would you add anything? I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add. I've got some other questions too. I'm happy to like go through those, but
Um, I know. I think. I mean, for me, because I did it, I did do a pivot, right? I was like, it's going to be all well, sorry, healthcare. No, no acronyms. It was going to be all healthcare. And then after the second term, it's like, I want to take contract management, privacy. And that's when the privacy piece really started to stand out for me. And, I chose an area of law that I thought was really interesting because of how it was evolving. And ended up focusing on change management for my capstone.
Mhm.
I don't know if I would have gotten that elsewhere. I was able, I like that flexibility that I could reach out. And I was like, oh, I'm going to focus on cannabis law because I am fascinated with how the states are pushing forward. And the Fed is, I don't know if they're catching up, or, what kind of adjustments will happen there. It's a lot. We're seeing kind of a similar dichotomy with privacy, right? It's
Oh,
just
for sure.
the states are starting to do, and we have the Europeans that are, for the data processing piece, and now we're waiting for the federal government to see, are they going to take a stance, or when will they take a stance? And I find it really, it does get frustrating sometimes when
Well,
you're trying
yeah.
to look at privacy, but it's fascinating to watch the landscape, and it is evolving so quickly
Mhm.
in a lot of ways and painfully slow in others.
Yeah, one of the questions that came up actually is kind of to that point. How do you keep up with the rapidly regulatory landscape on the one hand, and does AI, if anything, does it help in that space? And but to your point also, there are ways in which things are moving really slowly.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, so for InfoSec, part of if you work in with Department of Defense contracts or government contracts, there are some areas of law. We've been waiting for years for the new CMMC laws to come out. So there's that part. There's the new NIST standard, which is a cybersecurity standard. It's not a set of regulations, but recommended standards. That's finally, but it's been years of public comment and going back and adjusting in public comment. And oh, we're done. Nope, we're not done. We got too many public comments back during
Mhm.
that period of time. So we're waiting. Now it's finally 2025. They're finalizing at least one of them I'm aware of. And then in the area of AI, for example, the Europeans are known to move quite quickly. So as soon as we saw guidance come out, that's a keyword for the EU. We're going to publish guidance. Then that dinger goes off that parasite. That means in about 24 months, we're going to have regulations in place, if not before then.
Yeah.
So they, to me, it's a little bit easier to watch that regulatory space. US is not so straightforward because we don't take an omnibus approach. We're more siloed, segmented because of the business type we're in could have a huge influence.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, it isn't easy. We did bring in, so when I arrived, there was no automation. It was all spreadsheets and conversation and every regulatory agency possible bookmarked on my computer so I could continue to go out and face. So now I have people in certain areas and we're cross training across those areas. But we actually brought a system in to centralize all of our risk assessments that we do for third parties. And then we also have brought in another piece it's a control documentation library, but you can put different compliance frameworks inside of it. So what that means is, let's say you have GDPR that you want to follow as
Mhm.
a framework, and then you also have we'll put CMMC out there because you do work with the DoD, and then maybe you're also watching a state framework, right? What are they doing in another space?
You mean California?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's the one. I'm still trying to shed that state. So, um, so
They're
you can
always
put all
right
three.
behind GDPR. Yeah.
No, always. So
Yeah.
but we can see all three frameworks in a system now, right?
Oh,
Now
wow.
we have 11 frameworks, but what we're building next is if you have a regulation in, let's say GDPR, and it's going to change, I can run that reg. It will bring up the similar or potential like regs in the other frameworks. So now I can see a regulation across the entire
That's
landscape of our
amazing.
business. And the time savings once it is fully built and running is going to be astronomical. So
That's awesome.
no AI in that involved yet, although I do understand they have some other leveraging they're going to be releasing in a couple of years. I'm super curious to see how that goes.
So I definitely have a follow-up to that in a minute.
Mhm.
But it was a question that came in earlier that this actually kind of dovetails really well with. So when you were hired, what did your like kind of 30, 60, 90-day plan look like to build out your GRC program?
That is a really good question.
And probably, I mean, and
It,
truly like that could be a whole nother like
that could be an
webinar and
entire, yeah,
yeah.
how to build. Um, so I think like, my father was a mechanic and he always said, and he was a handyman, very handy around the farm. Um, Measure twice, cut once.
Mhm.
So I have carried that with me my whole life. He was also retired military, so I carried that with me too, which could play into the compliance piece
Yeah.
today. But what I did when I first got there, and I did have quite a good benefit, right? The person who had been there previously, who was leaving, who had been running, pieces of program. I had that full transition, so I got a full logical dump, if you will, of
Mhm.
over 100 line items.
Oh my
And
gosh.
then I immediately scheduled meetings with our chief compliance officer, risk, IT leadership. It's like I have a list of over 100 items that are supposed to be managed.
Yeah.
What's important?
Mhm.
We had to narrow it down. And it wasn't that there was anything on the list that didn't eventually need to be addressed, but we had to focus on what was most relevant.
Mhm.
So while that was going on, I was also lucky to have that transition meeting. I was identifying very quickly what I needed for a team and how quickly it was going to have to happen, because without that, it would have been a mountain that I probably couldn't have climbed by myself for certain. So it was getting in. If you think, I went in and assessed what was in front of me, met with leadership to understand what their priorities were, and then stepped back and said, this is what I need to build it.
Yeah,
I
for
was
sure.
not 100% accurate.
Mhm.
There, I look back now, would I have made changes? Absolutely. But it got us most of the way there. So now we are tearing things down and rebuilding new structure,
Mhm.
which is something I've never had the opportunity to do before. So we're building a
That's
new
awesome.
house. Yeah.
That's awesome. And I misread the previous, I imputed AI and I misread it. They were
Mhm.
asking actually about internal audit, so I need to go back to the original
Oh,
question.
sure.
It was, how is internal audit helping you in in the changing regulatory structure? So I apologize.
Mhm. So, so I would say in every environment I've been with, your relationship between risk and compliance and internal audit is always a very interesting one. You want to work together for the betterment of the company, but you also have to be careful to have a very strong line between the two areas. So, separation of duty is very important, right? And so what they have helped us with is coming in new, because they were also a newer um, an evolving organization. So some people are leaving, new leadership was coming in. Very interesting time to be there. But it's looking at, they went through the same process I did. What's in front of us? What's important to the business? Where are our gaps and how are we going to get to where we need to get? So they prioritized their audit schedule. We had what we thought was important. We've learned a
Mhm.
lot from them. They come in with their findings, and you could have findings, observations, questions is a lot of what happens the first year. Why is this like that? Half the time it was like, I have no idea because I wasn't here.
Right. Mhm.
So then you'd have to, but it challenges you in the GRC space to have to go back, meet with people. Do we have documentation on that? No, we don't. Okay, we just identified another gap. This should be part of our controlled documentation library and part of our standard foundation. So they really help identify kind of those gaps that are there, the strengths, and that helps us prioritize again, because we may have an area we think we're real strong in, and they come in and say, actually, with this new reg coming in, you have a major weakness here, right? So then we can address with the business on how we're going to attack that. And then there's always, the question of funding too, if there's something that really
Right.
needs a fix. But I let my boss fight most of those battles right now.
Yeah, no, I
He's
hear
been there
that.
longer.
No, and I appreciate the clarification from the person who
Yeah.
asked the question. I think that one of the things that we do, right, like, is we're like triaging, multitasking, right, is definitely
Mhm.
you read over and it highlights the point, like how much precision matters in this space, right? When we're
Yeah.
dealing with acronyms and things that are easy to just transmute letters. I absolutely just misread that. But in a space where it does like precision, I mean, we harp on it all the time in legal research and writing, but like it totally matters because it changed the entire context of the question. So thank
Right.
you so much for correcting. Um, I want to be super mindful of Christian's time. There's one more question that I would love your input on, and then I'm happy to like kind of let you drop off. And there's a couple of other questions that I'm happy to hang out for that are more just like program, funding and schedule
Sure.
and all that stuff. But one of the questions was, and I can certainly answer this, but I'd love your input.
Mhm.
Because so many of our courses are built to be primarily asynchronous. But as you can see, we're doing here, right? The discussion of law is so much richer when you have these like contemporaneous discussions.
Mhm.
I'd love for you to talk about your experience for how we handle that. I mean, I could tell you how we handle that, but I'd love for you
Mhm.
to speak to what your experience is like.
So it is interesting. I mean, this is coming from someone, keep in mind, that hadn't been in school for 30 years. So there is already a how do I study factor going on? How do I do this so many years later? Um, and I did not see it at first. I mean, you get the syllabus, you get the program, you're like, okay, this is my course. And then when it gets to that point where you're able to start taking your own electives and choose kind of your own program in a way, right? You don't have to take, if you're in healthcare, all healthcare courses, that second year. You could take healthcare and then privacy,
Mhm.
and then maybe there's something in the like the information area. Um, so that part I really liked. I think though that first year with those foundational courses, it may not be completely apparent while you're going through it, but I would say 2/3 of the way through, I had a major ta-da moment. There is not one thing from that foundational year that I do not use, I will say, on a daily basis in my career now. And it could be picking up a blue book and remembering how to cite something, or which I do often, or it could be something like somebody bringing me a cup of coffee. I'm sorry, I'm so happy right now. Um,
That's
it just got
awesome.
handed to
Thank
me.
you.
Um, so it could be that. Then you have, contract management. I just took that. I had the professor before. I really enjoyed the way that she taught. And I thought, what another great layer. And this was professional, but it was personal too. I mean, I don't know about anybody else out there, but you get a contract, they want you to review and sign it. I don't sign anything anymore. I don't click a box for a privacy policy ever now because I know how to read it. And it might take longer and it may have more due diligence to it for our part. But the life kind of skills I've gotten on a personal level from being able to have that flexibility, choosing those courses, um, I ask a lot harder questions than I used to, especially when it gets to, oh, here's your, package of how many pages for hiring this vendor in that supposedly meets all these requirements, and then you read it and you're like, actually, you don't. You
Mhm.
can't answer my questions. And these aren't big law questions. These are like big business questions that you learn to ask. So I think it gives you your foundation to build your house on, and then you can choose what kind of house you want. Do you like modern or do you want farmhouse? Or, do you want like a banquet of tiny homes? I mean, it really does
Yeah,
lend that kind of flexibility
right.
to it. And then you may not practice or even have any intent of going into an area, but if you have an area of interest, you can pursue that as part of your studies and your capstone to fulfill
Mhm.
that part. So I found it the foundation essential, and the pieces I was able to layer on top of that fit me,
Yeah.
and that was pretty outstanding.
I
I don't
think
know if you
part
get that
of
in other programs.
Yeah, I think the other
Yeah.
thing I hear you talking about is that truly what we're trying to create here is something that's like it can be anything and it will be everything that you make it. We have some students who
Mhm,
really that sounds so cliche. Um, in a 14-week term, any given one of our classes will have about 3 to 4 synchronous live discussions.
mhm,
So where you log in with the professor, with all of your classmates, and they are required in that they are recorded. And if you are not able to make the session, we hope that you are
mhm.
able to watch them and submit a summary to the professor, right? Like that's a part of
Yeah.
the participation and the grading. So we understand that life happens, that time may not work for everybody during those 3 or 4 time slots during the term. Um, but those times are just fantastic. And we don't always, I mean, when I've taught in a course, like we don't always stay on topic. We go off like, oh my gosh, the
Mhm,
court issued an opinion this week and we're talking about that. And all of these
mhm.
other really cool things come up, or somebody brings up hey, I'm really struggling with this at work. I've got this problem. What do you all think? Or it's an hour time slot. We end up going an hour and a half, 2 hours, just really connecting and having
Yeah.
great discussion. The other thing that we've done actually since Christian has graduated, and the alums are invited into this too. So we have our prospective students once you are admitted, so our admitted students, our current students, and then our alums. We host about 2 to 3 times every semester. We call them like social hours, a virtual opportunity for everybody to just come in and like hang out, right? And sometimes
Yeah.
there's topics, sometimes there's not. It's an opportunity to network, an opportunity to, meet future employers, future hires, really have those same sort of discussions. And we end up talking about law because we all kind of have that brain. Um, and so we try and foster those discussions both inside and outside of the classroom, to allow for some of that dialogue, because it is really, really important.
Yeah.
The other thing that I'll say, is that as a student of the institution, Seattle University School of Law, we host so many discussions all the time on campus, and they are almost always streamed. So I had a discussion with the general counsel of the Seattle Mariners a couple weeks ago. We have a social justice Monday every week, and they're almost always streamed online, and you can hear, summaries about cases that have just come out of the Supreme Court, or, hot topics that are kind of like in the news. So there's a lot of opportunity to engage, and it really is up to you to engage with and around whatever it is that's interesting to you.
Yeah. And
Um,
there's
go ahead.
something else that I think is worth bringing up too is, part of being involved with the program, and whether it's active or as an alumni, Seattle University offers a lot of different events. And last summer, I was able to go to the artificial intelligence, it was a symposium. I can't even explain what happened there. It was so incredible. But they brought these powerful minds together to talk about the ethics of AI and how
Mhm.
does technology and human work together. And they had workshops, and the speakers were amazing, and it's free. Like,
Yeah.
this university offers a lot of opportunities that are free, and I happen to be in Portland visiting family, so I jumped on the train and came up for a couple of things. It
Yeah.
was fantastic. They do offer a lot while you're in the program, but I've been very impressed with what's offered after, and that's a
Yeah.
lot of community, further education, opportunity to network. I mean, there's a lot available, and all you have to do is take advantage of it, reach out for it,
Totally.
use it. It's there to, kind of add to your career and your life. So I would
Yeah.
encourage that.
Yeah, I mean, somebody brought up just now, like something that they're wanting to research, specifically, or like wanting to know more about the upcoming Washington Privacy Act. And I'm thinking, well, it's a great capstone project, right? Like that's an
Yeah.
opportunity to dig in, and like the world is your oyster in the capstone. And there's some webinars. I'm happy to send them to you on our website about, we've just hosted a big symposium around our capstone projects, and several of our alums presented, and talk about a deep dive into truly almost anything that you could be interested in the regulatory
Yeah.
space. So, Christian, I'm happy to like have you for as long as you are available. I just wanted to wrap up with a couple of additional notes for folks. We had a question about funding for the program. But if you need to like head out and get back to work, please
Yeah.
feel free to drop off.
Okay.
I really, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. So as I
Um,
am going to drop, I thank you
yeah.
everybody that signed up today. And if there are any follow-up questions, Kelly, please do feel free to send my contact
Okay.
information, or put me in touch.
I will. Thank you so much. I
Yeah,
really appreciate your help.
absolutely.
All right. Take care.
Enjoy.
Thanks so much,
Bye.
Christian. For those of you all who are going to hang out with us, just a couple of other notes, and I'm happy to hang out for as long as you all have questions. Our scholarship deadline is coming up. We still have some time. It's until July 1st. So we had a question about funding for folks who are wanting to certainly reduce the cost of attendance, whether or not you are working or any otherwise. I mean, we're always looking to save some money here. We offer the opportunity for merit scholarships for any of our students who are applying. So if you are looking to be considered for merit scholarships, make sure your application is in by July 1st. On the application, there is a box where you can submit your scholarship statement, and there's some prompts to reply to there. Nothing else that you need to do. Just make sure that you're completing that scholarship prompt when you submit your application, and you will be considered. Our final application deadline is going to be on August 12th, I believe, if I have that right. And our classes for fall begin on September 3rd. And I'm going to drop my email in the chat for you all. And actually, I will drop it in the chat, but so you can uh, copy and paste it. But feel free to email us at lawgraduateonline@seattleu.edu. And our team checks that pretty regularly, so we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Some of the other questions, or if you have any other questions after this, please feel free to email us and let us know. We're happy to help. Our phone number is there also. And most of you at this point probably have my personal email address and are able to, oh, I apologize. Thank you. Somebody let me know that the chat is disabled. Well, that's not helpful. I'm so sorry about that. Let me see, I can actually change that. I can make it so that I can send to you all. You all can't send, but there you go. Okay. And here was also that list of classes that I had posted earlier that you probably weren't able to see then either. The recording will be available and will be posted online probably within a couple of weeks. Sometimes it takes us a little bit to turn that around. So we will get that back to you in a couple of weeks. But feel free in the meantime, if you have any questions that have come up, to send me an email. I'm happy to get back to you and set up some time to chat personally. Otherwise, if there's no other questions, I'm happy to hang out for a few minutes. Thank you all so much for joining us. Really, really appreciate your questions. They were all super great.